West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
In August, in South Dakota, the CEO of a pillow company hosted what he called a cyber symposium. This guy, you may know, his company is called My Pillow. And ever since the 2020 election, the My Pillow guy has spent every waking hour pushing a whole suite of conspiracy theories about how the election was stolen from Donald Trump. And at his big cyber symposium thing, the My Pillow guy promised that he was finally going to reveal the proof that Joe Biden wasn't really president. And the proof would be so overwhelming, so incontrovertible that everybody would stop arguing about this stuff. Everybody would stop scoffing at him. Everybody would actually just agree that Trump really was still president and Biden wasn't elected, and he would have no choice but to hand the White House back to Donald Trump. To provide this proof, to show how voting systems were rigged to flip votes from Biden to Trump or whatever. At his cyber symposium, there were these long presentations where supposed cyber experts dug through election software. Specifically, they dug through election software from Mesa County, Colorado. Election software from Mesa County, Colorado was also handed out on thumb drives at the event. It was also posted online for anyone to download, along with the passwords to Mesa County, Colorado's actual election equipment. That was unnerving and also bizarre. I mean, this is supposedly secure elections material. This is sensitive stuff. How did it end up at this crackpot conspiracy conference in South Dakota? Well, interesting story, it turns out. One of the special guests joining the My Pillow guy at his cyber symposium was the elected county clerk, the Republican county clerk of Mesa County, Colorado, the woman who ran elections in that county. And like the pillow poobah, she said she too was convinced that the election had been stolen. She said she'd been trying to get to the bottom of it in her county. But there she was, in South Dakota, on stage with the pillow guy, joined by the campaign manager for far-right Trump-supporting Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, which I think we've got here. Yes, that's her on the left there. And as they were all gathered there in South Dakota, local authorities back in Colorado were simultaneously raiding the office of that Mesa County clerk because they had reason to believe she was behind the security breach that led to all this secure election software being passed around and posted online, including the passwords. What investigators discovered was that late one night, the Mesa County clerk had gone to the warehouse that stores critical election equipment in that county. The surveillance cameras were inexplicably turned off at that time. She took some guy in there with her, a guy who was unauthorized to be there, and they apparently copied hard drives and election management software from voting machines. And then, wouldn't you know it, all that stuff ended up posted online by pro-Trump election conspiracy crackpots. And this Mesa County clerk claimed she had no idea how that happened. Definitely just a coincidence. After her office got raided, she went into hiding. After the South Dakota Cyber Symposium thing was over, she did not go back to Colorado from there. The Pillow CEO claimed to be flying her around the country to various safe locations where she could be a regular guest on his web-streamed conspiracy TV show. Colorado Secretary of State Gina Griswold was forced to decertify all the voting machines in Mesa County, Colorado, because they had not only been tampered with, but their software and passwords had been posted online. Mesa County had to get all new voting machines at taxpayer expense. Secretary of State Griswold barred the Mesa County clerk from administering any more elections, and a judge agreed. Well, yesterday in Colorado, the top election official in Mesa County, the elected Republican Mesa County clerk, and the campaign manager for far-right Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, yesterday, both of them had their homes raided by the FBI. And by the state attorney general's office, and by the local district attorney's office. Federal, state, and local authorities working together searched their homes. The local DA telling the news outlet Colorado Politics that these search warrants were carried out to, quote, gather evidence in connection with an investigation into the Mesa County Clerk and Recorder's Office. After yesterday's raid, the Mesa County clerk went back on the live stream webcast podcast thing hosted by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, who has now made a full-time job of promoting Trump's election conspiracies. What she told the Lindell live stream podcast thing was that the government was coming down on her as part of a cover-up, and she's going to keep fighting because this is all about our country and stuff. It's a little awkward because this is the Pillow Guys webcast, so even when they're fighting for the very soul of our democracy, the whole lower third of the screen you can see there. Don't forget to use promo code B66 at mypillow.com to save up to... That's literally the lower third of the live stream the whole time she's doing the interview. Of all the election conspiracies and fake election audits and the stop the steal stuff that we have covered on this show, none of which is going away, this one might be the wildest, most bizarre story of them all. And it seems like the first one that has resulted in an FBI raid on at least 4 sites in a single state for what appears to be a quite serious federal, state, and local investigation into what these folks are up to. Joining us now is Colorado Secretary of State Gina Griswold. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel.
So this story it started off as something that seemed small and awkward and maybe not worth figuring out the details of, but it has metastasized and become not only very serious, but also sort of riveting in its in the way it has unfolded. Let me just ask you if I missed any important parts of this or if I said any of it wrong.
Well, you got the MyPillow guy. You got QAnon, unauthorized access. The only thing that I would add on is the entity that leaked the passwords and then the images of the server of the voting equipment is the guy who is allegedly Q of QAnon. So this is MyPillow guy plus QAnon plus election deniers compromising voting equipment to try to prove conspiracies.
And can you explain what you mean by compromise there? Like, what is dangerous about what was exposed here? Obviously, we think of election software and elections equipment as needing to be kept secure. And there's the reason that there's things like passwords and all that. But what kind of compromise was this? Why did Mesa County have to get all new equipment?
Well, just the fact that an unauthorized person accessed the voting equipment and that passwords, which can only be used in person, were leaked, compromised the equipment. But in fact, when we went and investigated the equipment, we saw that settings were changed on that equipment. So either way, I was put in a position to just decertify it. Mesa County replaced the equipment. We, of course, asked a judge to bar that clerk, which the clerk was barred. And I'll tell you, Rachel, we just had elections and they went great in Mesa County. But this is an emerging threat to our democracy. The same conspiracy theories that were being pushed to set the table for voter suppression are now causing insider threats to election administration.
Can I ask you what you can tell the public about the involvement of Congresswoman Boebert's campaign manager here? I think that we had seen her as a sort of adjacent figure in this scandal thus far, but now that it appears that her home was one of the places that were raided, or that had search warrants executed yesterday, can you tell us at all about what her involvement might be?
Well, I can't fully comment on an ongoing criminal investigation, but what I can say is that election administration positions are really important positions. These are people at the local and the state level that are entrusted in making sure that Americans have their voices heard in free, safe, and accessible elections. And the extreme right knows that. We have been seeing people like Steve Bannon, people close to the former president, encouraging extremists to take local election positions. We are seeing at this point in every swing state, someone who is either at the insurrection or spreading the big lie, running for Secretary of State. So that's the chief election administrator. So we need to make sure that the extremists on the right are not successful in compromising these key positions, and that Americans continue to have people run their elections that believe in their voice, their vote, and in democracy.
It is Thursday, the 18th of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well. The jurors in the Rittenhouse trial are, I believe, right now, or maybe just a while ago, maybe a little bit earlier, made their way back into deliberations. And, of course, we here in the bubble, we're in the bubble at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I don't know if they've decided in just the minutes that they had been back in to decide the fate of the kid. But it looks like that judge, no matter what happens, well, let's put it this way. If the jury comes back with a guilty verdict, the judge will call a mistrial. They went back and forth over the drone footage from the police department. Apparently, the defense doesn't know how to decompress a file, and they are insisting they got lower quality video imagery, and they want a mistrial. And what does the supposed low quality video show? It shows the kid threatening people up and down the street with his gun long before he ever shot people. That's what it shows. That's why the defense doesn't want it in. And that is why the judge is also going to prevent it from coming in. And when it gets shown, then he'll call a mistrial. Oh, boy. Now, lots of questions arise out of this judge's rulings. The one that hovers above all is this ridiculous attitude that you can't call the victims murdered by Rittenhouse victims, because that would be unfair to Kyle. Now, I don't remember Ted Bundy being coddled by the judge in his trial. I don't remember the women murdered by Ted Bundy denied the term victims. They were all called victims. No judge does the kinds of shit that this guy Schroeder is doing. And he's so upset that now there's cameras in there, and it's just terrible what is being said out in the world about what's going on in his court. Yeah, because the whole world sees what is going on in your court. The dropping of the gun charge because the judge didn't like the law, so therefore Kyle's not guilty of it. The judge can be censored after the fact, but it doesn't put Kyle in jail. So it doesn't matter what happens to this judge. In fact, he's fairly old, 75 or so. You never know. The deep pockets on the right just might have told him, hey, don't worry about it. You're set. We'll take care of you. It also brings to mind another judge, one Anthony Kennedy. I still want to know what went on between Trump and Kennedy when Kennedy announced his retirement. I really want to know what that conversation was that stopped Kennedy in his tracks and wagged a finger at Trump. I still want to know about that. Will we ever learn it? Well, maybe. Maybe it might be buried in the Kennedy file somewhere because we're never going to hear about that either. You know, we were supposed to hear that 50 years afterwards. That was the edict laid down by LBJ. And I thought, wow, man, they're trying to bury this. And then right when it gets to the point where we get to see it, they say, oh, no, we're going to have to put another delay. The American people just aren't ready for it yet. Because what does it show? That the right-wing takeover of the United States of America has been entrenched since the Kennedys? I wonder. But that's a conspiracy for another day, isn't it? Or is it the conspiracy that hovers over us every day? I don't know. They got JFK Jr. expected to resurrect himself in Dallas at Dealey Plaza. People are still there. Now, I got to tell you, if they're staying at the hotels, I don't think the hotels are upset, to be honest with you. Yeah, maybe the staff, behind closed doors are snickering about it, but the hotel's making some money. And that's all that matters. It doesn't matter that there's a deathly conspiracy out there the reason it's deathly is because it kills people. That doesn't matter because commerce reigns above all. So I don't really think that the hotels that are being occupied by these Q-nuts, I don't think that they're very upset about it. In fact, they look at it as a windfall. Oh, you're going to stay longer? Please do. It's off season now anyway, isn't it? Yes, it is. Well, we got the Kyle Rittenhouse trial going on. We got the Ahmaud Arbery trial going on. I love how those guys got in a couple of trucks, chased down Ahmaud Arbery, tuckered him out, tired him out, then got out with their guns, and they are now the victims? Doesn't Arbery get to defend himself? Well, I guess he tried. And every murderer, well, let's put it this way, every white nationalist, murderous KKK Nazi thug thinks that everybody who's going to take the gun out of their hand, they're immediately going to use it on them. I think normally what happens is that, maybe the guy keeps the gun so he can back out of there because the other guys had guns too. I think our ilk in a similar situation, if one was able to wrest control of the gun away from the murderous Nazi white nationalist thug, might throw the gun as far away as possible, rather than use it on the perp. I was in a life and death situation. Well, you put yourself there, you effing idiot. You were the aggressor, not the victim, and yet, he is being tried, or they are being tried by a jury of their peers. All right. Two to look at, and of course, what cracks me up is that the right wing, at least here in the local Facebook pages here in Southern Oregon, the right wingers, the maggots, they're rhetorically questioning each other, like, why are the liberals so upset about these trials? I know they're snickering behind their keyboards. Because they make it sound like, well, they're just such they're such inconsequential trials. Why are the libs so upset about them? And yet, in the same breath, they accuse the libs of not watching the whole trial. Have you not been watching the trial? You've been only getting your information from CBS or CNN or MSNBC. And they're getting their information from ON, Newsmax, Sinclair, and Fox. They're not sitting there through the whole trial watching the trial, please. They don't even know how to follow a trial. But I love how they put that out there. Oh, haven't you been watching the trial? Well, actually, yeah. Have been watching the trial, the actual live feed. Now, I will admit to you out there, I'm not sitting in front of the TV, or I wasn't sitting in front of the TV live feed for the whole time. But you catch up. So the drone footage, once again back at the Rittenhouse trial, is going to be used as evidence or as cause for a mistrial. All right. We all knew that was going to happen. And now the Aubrey trial, the judge in the Aubrey trial is a lot more level-headed and has not allowed the overt racism to rule the roost. That continues to be brought to the fore. The defense attorney for one of the perps in the Aubrey trial went off on Jesse Jackson. I don't want these black pastors in here. It's intimidating the jury. F you effing freak. Jesus. I would think that the white nationalist neo-Nazis with the axe handles might be a tad more intimidating. Black preachers. What are they going to do? Hulk up? Jeez, these racists. Yep. We're right back into the days of Bull Connor. Remember him? I do. Well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Yes, at the top. And I'm aware David went through this story, but I just wanted to share Rachel's breakdown and her conversation. I believe that was with the Secretary of State in Colorado. Am I correct? Regardless, breaking it down about this QAnon-adjacent county clerk in Mesa County in Colorado who compromised election equipment, changed passwords, stole passwords, altered the settings, reprogrammed the machines. All the stuff they blame us for doing. Well, yeah, she's under a criminal investigation, as well as Lauren Boebert's campaign manager, and I wonder, has this always been a far-flung right-wing conspiracy? Hillary was right. On the rest of the menu, Iran-backed hackers are accused of targeting critical U.S. sectors. Native American tribes welcomed an infusion of money in the massive infrastructure bill, and Oklahoma is challenging the Pentagon's vaccine mandate for the National Guard. What? I'm sorry. The Pentagon is a federal type of agency, and Oklahoma's going to challenge them? So much for honoring the military now, isn't it? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where an Israeli couple has been released by Turkey after being detained on suspicion of espionage. For what? For photographing Erdogan's residence from a bridge. And over 20,000 people marched peacefully through Athens to mark the anniversary of the bloody anti-dictatorship uprising of 1973. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly, for doing so. If you would look across the page to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it would help us out tremendously. If you could afford, the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, and if you could afford to send those funds our way once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare, and then we pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this resistance against the hostile Nazi takeover of the United States of America. We will not allow it to happen. And we have you to thank with your because of your generosity that allows us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, so many years ago. All kidding aside, we do need the funds. And we intend to continue paying our bills so we can continue this resistance radio that has been 24/7, 365 for over 10 years, going on 11 now. What the hell? If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that. And you can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then incidentally I post that up on Twitter and other social media platforms. You know who they are. The show notes and links are very important, so check them out. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and most importantly, please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, is out of the Associated Press by Eric Tucker, Alan Suderman, and Frank Bajik. Hackers linked to the Iranian government have been targeting a broad range of victims inside the United States, including by deploying ransomware, according to an advisory issued yesterday, Wednesday, by American, British, and Australian officials. The advisory said that in recent months, Iran has exploited computer vulnerabilities exposed by hackers before they can be fixed, and targeted entities in the transportation, healthcare, and public health sectors. The attackers leveraged the initial attack for additional operations such as data exfiltration, ransomware, and extortion, according to the advisory. The group has used the same Microsoft Exchange vulnerability in Australia, officials say. The warning is notable because even though ransomware attacks remain prevalent in the U.S., most of the significant ones in the past year have been attributed to Russia-based criminal hacker gangs rather than Iranian hackers. Government officials aren't the only ones noticing the Iranian activity. Tech giant Microsoft announced on Tuesday that it had seen 6 different groups in Iran deploying ransomware since last year. Microsoft said one of the groups spent significant time and energy trying to build rapport with their intended victims before targeting them with spear phishing campaigns. The group uses fake conference invitations or interview requests and frequently masquerade as officials at think tanks in D.C. as a cover, Microsoft said. Once rapport is built and a malicious link is sent, the Iranians are extra pushy at trying to get their victims to click on it, said James Elliott, a member of the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. These guys are the biggest pain in the rear. Every 2 hours they're sending an email, Elliott said at the WarCon Cybersecurity Conference on Tuesday. Earlier this year, Facebook announced that it had found Iranian hackers using sophisticated fake online personas to build trust with targets and get them to click on malicious links, and often posed as recruiters of defense and aerospace companies. Researchers at the CrowdStrike cybersecurity firm said they and competitors began seeing this type of Iranian activity last year. The Iranian ransomware attacks, unlike those sponsored by North Korea's government, are not designed to generate revenue so much as for espionage, to sow disinformation, to harass and embarrass foes, Israel chief among them, and to essentially wear down their targets, CrowdStrike researchers said at the Cyber WarCon event. While these operations will use ransom notes and dedicated leak sites demanding hard cryptocurrency, we're really not seeing any viable effort at actual currency generation, CrowdStrike Global Threat Analysis Director Katie Blankenship said. CrowdStrike considers Iran to be the trendsetter in this novel, low form of cyber attack, which typically involves paralyzing a network with ransomware, stealing information, and then leaking it online. The researchers call the method lock and leak. It is less visible, less costly, and provides more room for deniability, Blankenship said. Fonseca of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tribes welcomed an infusion of money in the massive infrastructure bill to expand broadband coverage, fix roads, and address water and sanitation needs, but they say real change will come only with sustained investment. President Joe Biden signed the $1.2 trillion deal earlier this week that includes about $11 billion in benefits for Indian country, according to the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. About one-third of that, $3.5 billion, will go to the Indian Health Service, the federal agency tasked with providing health care for more than 2 million Native American and Alaska Natives. The funding is enough to address more than 1,560 projects that have been on the agency's list of water and sanitation deficiencies in 12 regions, estimated to cost nearly $2.6 billion. Projects in Alaska and the Southwest region that covers the Navajo Nation, where many tribal members live without running water and indoor plumbing, collectively have the largest price tags. In these and several other tribal communities, sanitation and clean water systems would never be built because the annual appropriations were insufficient to cover all the deficiencies, the National Indian Health Board said. Indian Health Service spokeswoman Jennifer Bushik said the agency will consult with tribes soon to determine how to allocate the funding. Another $2.5 billion will go to fulfill tribal water rights settlements that already have been approved. The Interior Department hasn't specified which agreements that quantify tribes' rights to water are included, but the leaders of the Navajo Nation, which extends into parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and the White Mountain Apache Tribe in eastern Arizona, said they expect to benefit from the funding. Heather Tanana, who is Navajo and an assistant law professor at the University of Utah, is part of a group that released a roadmap on Tuesday on how the federal government can move forward with the funding effectively. It includes coordination among federal agencies, working with tribes and through existing tribal task forces. Officials with the Biden administration repeatedly referred to a whole-of-government approach this week during the White House Tribal Nation Summit in announcing agreements among federal agencies on tribal treaty rights and sacred sites. Tanana, the research lead for the Tribal Clean Water Initiative, said goals and accountability also must be part of the equation, along with building capacity for tribes to operate water and sanitation systems on their own. The group of tribal members Water experts and nonprofits push for access to clean water for tribes in the Colorado River Basin and beyond. Whole of government shouldn't just be a catchy phrase, Tanana said. It's critical to getting the money that Congress just appropriated onto the ground and into actual projects. Lolita C. Baldor of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. A dispute between Oklahoma's governor and the Pentagon over the COVID-19 vaccine mandate is setting up the first critical test of the military's authority to require National Guard troops to get the shot and laying the groundwork for potential protests from other states. Acting on an order from Republican Governor Kevin Stitt, the state's adjutant general sent a memo telling troops that they are not required to get the shot and no negative administrative or legal action would be taken against them if they refuse. That order from Brigadier General Thomas Mancino came as Stitt asked Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to consider suspending the mandate for members of the Oklahoma Guard. A senior defense official told reporters yesterday, Wednesday, that a governor does not have the authority to relieve Guard members of their military medical readiness requirements. The official, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss ongoing legal matters, said Guard members who refuse to comply will risk losing their National Guard jobs. As of Wednesday, Austin had not formally responded to Stitt, the first and so far only governor to formally protest the Guard requirement. His challenge raises a number of legal questions and highlights the combative political debate over the vaccine. The White House and health officials have credited mandates with driving up vaccination rates and reducing deaths from the coronavirus pandemic. It's President Joe Biden's boldest move yet to persuade reluctant Americans to finally get a vaccine, but is facing legal fights by states, workers, and federal employees. The military is a unique testing ground. The Pentagon considers the vaccine critical to maintaining a ready force that can deploy in a moment's notice to protect the nation, and Guard and Reserve members are part of that force. Yet, the Guard is also a bit different. When Guard troops are state active duty, such as responding to local events, they report to the governor and are paid by the state. But during their monthly or annual training, or when they are responding to larger disasters in the state, they are controlled by the governor, but funded by the federal government. The Guard can also be activated for federal duty, including for overseas deployments under a different status that treats them like active duty troops under federal control and funding. Pentagon officials have repeatedly said that Austin has the authority to set medical readiness requirements, including vaccines, for the entire force, including the Guard. They argue that Guard members must meet those requirements to maintain their federal recognition to be able to deploy and be paid for training. In a letter this month, Stitt told Austin that the mandate, quote, violates the personal freedoms of many Oklahomans, as it asks them to potentially sacrifice their personal beliefs in order not to lose their jobs, end quote. He said the state needs its Guard members for storms and other weather emergencies. It is irresponsible for the federal government to place mandatory vaccine obligations on Oklahoma National Guardsmen, which could potentially limit the number of individuals that I can call upon to assist the state during an emergency, Stitwined. In this reporter's opinion. According to the governor's office, more than 1,000 Army and Air Force Guard members, or about 13% of the state's 8,200 troops, have indicated they won't get the vaccine, according to an internal survey. The 2,000-plus Air Guard members have until December 2nd to get shots, based on a deadline set by the Air Force. Stitt spokeswoman Carly Atchison said about 89% of the Air Guard has been vaccinated. A military official said the Oklahoma Air Guard is expected to reach about 95% by the deadline. The official spoke on condition that no one tell anybody who they are because they don't want to get, death threats from the maggots, I would think. About 40% of Oklahoma's Army Guard members are vaccinated, Atchison said. The Army Guard is not required to be vaccinated until June. Defense officials have declined to provide specifics on how the mandate will be enforced and how Guard troops may be disciplined or administratively processed out of the Guard and how quickly that could happen. They also won't say whether commanders who decline to enforce the mandate will also be subject to any punishment. Well, they better. That brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today we're going to talk about kids' vaccines, the low risks and the considerable benefits.
And why the shots protect people better than previous COVID infections do. The big news this week is that the FDA and the CDC have made COVID vaccines available to kids aged 5 through 11. How are parents reacting, and what do we know about the vaccine's safety in this age group, Tanya?
Well, Josh, many parents are breathing a collective sigh of relief that they can now protect their young ones from COVID. They're also thrilled that their kids can get back to doing activities that they had to give up during the pandemic, like seeing their grandparents or playing with friends. But other parents are reluctant to get their kids vaccinated or still on the fence. Here's what we do know. While COVID is generally milder in children, more than 1 million kids were infected with the virus in September alone, and 41 died, according to the CDC. That's 41 sets of parents who had to bury a child who died from a preventable illness. The Pfizer vaccine was tested in more than 1,500 kids in the 5 to 11 age group. They were given 1/3 the dose adults get. The vaccine was more than 90% effective at preventing symptomatic COVID, and the few infections that did occur in vaccinated kids were all mild. Vaccinated 5 to 11-year-olds also had a similar level of antibodies as teenagers who got the adult dose. The side effects from the vaccine were similar to those in teens, but milder. They included fatigue, headache, fever, chills, and pain at the injection site. And there were no cases of myocarditis or pericarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle or lining, which have occurred in a small percentage of teens and young adults who got the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. Myocarditis is more common in boys, but it's still so rare that it would be nearly impossible to have a big enough clinical trial to see the effects. Myocarditis can also be caused by infections, including COVID itself, where it is often more severe. While some young adults have been hospitalized with vaccine-related myocarditis, most cases resolve on their own, and there have been no deaths linked to the vaccine. The CDC and FDA both concluded in separate meetings that the benefits of recommending the COVID vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds outweigh the risks. And we routinely vaccinate kids against diseases that hospitalize or kill far fewer children. Vaccinating kids also protects communities and could get us closer to ending this pandemic. I keep hearing some people say they don't need a COVID vaccine because they've already been infected. They say they are immune. Is that true?
That's actually a reasonable thing to wonder. If you've been infected by the COVID-causing virus already, do you have enough natural immunity to prevent a second infection? The quick answer is that COVID vaccines work better. Prior infection does give your immune system some resistance. However, when studies compare that to the immunity you gain from vaccines, it's not as strong or as long-lasting or as good at keeping you out of the hospital. Now, here's the longer, more complicated answer. Infections with some other viruses do give people lasting immunity. It happens with chickenpox, it happens with the mumps, for instance. But the COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2, behaves differently from these other viruses. Immunity to it doesn't last as long. Yet, this idea that you can maintain natural immunity has become part of the pushback against vaccine mandates. There's even a vaguely worded bill in Congress promoting it. A new study does kind of a head-to-head comparison of natural immunity and vaccines. It looked at 7,000 patients in the U.S. hospitalized with COVID-like breathing trouble. Some had been previously infected with the virus and were not vaccinated. Others had been, with either Pfizer or Moderna. When tested, the previously infected patients were more than 5 times more likely to be positive for the virus than were vaccinated patients. They'd been reinfected. Many of the vaccinated people, in contrast, turned out to have some non-COVID illness. The study was led by Catherine Bozio of the CDC, if you want to look it up. Another CDC study of a few hundred people in Kentucky, published in August, found that previously infected but unvaccinated people were twice as likely to get reinfected than were vaccinated folks. And there's more. A study in the journal Science from July indicated that vaccination actually helps previously infected people. Vaccines boosted their antibodies against the virus by 1,000-fold.
So vaccine immunity is always better, then?
Well, remember I said it's complicated. A study of thousands of people in Israel found that previous infections prevented new infections more often than vaccines did. There are some cautions, though. The researchers didn't test all the unvaccinated people. Some may have had undetected, mild, or asymptomatic reinfections. There might have been enough of those to swing the numbers in favor of vaccination. Also, that study hasn't been peer-reviewed. Finally, it found that previous infections plus vaccinations produced the best protection of all. Here's the bottom line. The CDC just reviewed dozens of studies on this. It says that, broadly, both natural infections and vaccines keep risk low for about 6 months. But getting down to the individual level, there are wide swings in antibody levels after natural infection, some high, some low. Antibodies after vaccination, though, are consistently higher and go after the virus harder. Given a virus that has killed 5 million people around the world, 750,000 in the U.S., and put 8,300 young kids in this country in the hospital, the evidence says that vaccines keep you much safer.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On On this day in labor history, the year was 1993. That was the day 21,000 attendants, mostly women, caught American Airlines by surprise in their first strike ever against the company. 80% of all flights were canceled a week before Thanksgiving as solid picket lines formed at 40 airports across the country. CEO Robert Crandall, who commanded $1 million a year salary and preferred the nickname Fang, was at a loss when flight attendants refused to be bullied by threats of scab replacements. Hoping to smash seniority and scheduling rights, he canceled all vacations for months. Crandall's claims to company losses could hardly be believed after the company reported third-quarter profits of $118 million. Attendants were fed up with years of concessionary contracts that reduced their wages by as much as 40%. One woman picketer summed up the company's attitude saying, quote, "We're just a bunch of skirts." The strike was so popular that pilots and Teamsters often joined picketers. In New York City, 200 members of Local 1199 hospital workers walked the picket line in solidarity. Fed up machinists at United Airlines in Denver were so inspired they staged a solidarity sick-out the first day of the strike. 4 days later, President Clinton intervened to end the strike and force binding arbitration. While many saw this as a victory, workers returned to the jobs under the same conditions that forced them to strike while they waited for arbitrators to render a decision. 2 years later, arbitrators finally rendered that decision. They awarded American the right to reduce staffing level on some flights, but flight attendants would win a 17% wage increase and retain most work rules.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 38 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 56. More clouds than sun throughout the day with a slight chance of a rain shower. Winds will be light and variable throughout the day. Cloudy tonight with occasional rain showers, lows in the mid-40s, winds light and variable. Looks like we'll have a little less than a quarter inch of rain tonight. And it looks like we'll have about the same tomorrow with rain showers early with overcast skies later in the day. Highs in the low 50s, winds light and variable. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon continue to rise. Why is that? Because of vaccine deniers, these idiots. We now have increased our total to 243,037 confirmed cases. Our deceased have also increased by 2 and now stands at 345 confirmed. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window right here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is moderate at 72 parts per million because people are burning wood in their wood-smoked fireplaces to keep warm. And the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.01 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles and relative humidity is at 94%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowd sources from around the world. London is 56 and cloudy. Paris is 51 and fair. Rome is 65 and sunny. Kyiv is 36 and cloudy. Kabul is 44 and clear. Hong Kong is 66 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 52 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 67 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 51 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 59 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. and that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Alan Bernstein of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An Israeli couple held by Turkey on suspicion of espionage returned home today after they were released from a week-long detention. Morty and Natalie Oknin arrived to their home in central Israel, where they were greeted by family and a crowd of reporters. From her apartment's balcony, Natalie thanked all those involved in securing their release. A statement by Israel's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister earlier announced the release and also expressed gratitude to the President and government of Turkey. There was no official statement from Turkish officials on the release. Turkey's private DHA news agency reported that a Turkish citizen who was arrested along with the couple was also released. According to both offices in Israel and Turkey, Erdogan emphasized the importance of ties between the countries, and they both highlighted the need to focus on regional peace. The leaders agreed to remain in touch.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Over 20,000 people marched peacefully through Athens on Wednesday yesterday to mark the anniversary of the bloody anti-dictatorship uprising in 1973. More than 5,000 police were deployed to keep order, as violence involving anarchist demonstrators has often marred the annual march to the U.S. Embassy. The event went ahead despite restrictions related to the pandemic, and most of the marchers wore masks. After the march, minor clashes briefly broke out in another part of town when some youths threw stones at police and set fire to dumpsters. A similar demonstration was held in Greece's second largest city of Thessaloniki with about 14,000 participants. The march ended peacefully, but afterwards youths threw petrol bombs at police, who responded with tear gas and a water cannon. No injuries were reported, and police said at least 20 suspected rioters were detained. In 1973, student-led pro-democracy protests at the Athens Polytechnic were crushed by police and troops sent by the military regime. Officers opened fire on unarmed demonstrators and bystanders near the Polytechnic, and an army tank smashed in the gates of the university complex, behind which many students were gathered. At least 20 were thought to have been killed, though the precise death toll of the November 1973 events remains unknown. But the uprising was followed by a putsch within the military regime that was ruling Greece since 1967, which brought even more hardline officers into power. Democracy was restored only in July of 1974 after the dictatorship collapsed, and that was provoked by the junta's own machinations aiming to unite the island, whose majority is Greek-speaking with Greece. Mostly left-wing demonstrators have marched to the U.S. Embassy every year since 1974 because Washington was seen as supportive of Greece's far-right military regime. Same as it always was. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.